Ambassador Frelick, thank you so much for joining us on UpFront.
My pleasure.
Bashar al-Assad has fled Syria, marking the end of a 13-year war in the country. Since his ouster, more than a dozen European countries, including Austria, Germany, Belgium, Finland, Ireland, Greece, Norway, they've suspended asylum procedures for Syrian migrants. Austria is even offering a 1,000 euro incentive for migrants to leave and is preparing a deportation program. What do these moves mean? What are their significance?
Well, deportation should be out of the question. I mean, it's just way too early to talk about forcibly returning anyone to Syria. This is a completely unstable situation. It's volatile. You don't know what direction things are going. Humanitarian needs in the country are off the charts. They haven't begun any restoration, rehabilitation, any ability to reintegrate people at this point. Suspended decision making, that's acceptable, but to deport anyone at this time is completely unacceptable.
Do you expect
and I think that's the red line that we need to absolutely be making.
Do you expect us to cross that red line? Do you expect a mass deportation of Syrians?
The expectation, I mean, we hope not, certainly. Yeah. I think what you're going to see is this mix of, you have people that are spontaneously returning, you have people that want to return, that want to voluntarily repatriate, and that would, grab the chance to get 1,000 euros to be able to go home if that's what they want to do anyway, of course. And it is the human right of any person to return to their country. That's a basic right, even to return to danger. But the fact that one person wants to go back and chooses to go back now shouldn't greenlight forcing other people back, because other people, every person has different personal circumstances. There's general conditions that nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month. And so for the most part, what we're looking at when we talk about voluntary refugee repatriation is, can you return safely in dignity? Are the conditions favorable for return? And there's a concern about safety. I mean, mine clearance, yeah, and the remnants of explosive devices that are still there. Not to mention just the destruction, the devastation of the country. What do you have to go back to if you don't have potable water, you don't have electricity, you don't have a roof over your head?
One of the things that troubles me a bit is the amount of anti-immigrant rhetoric. Europe has certainly seen a surge in that kind of rhetoric. In Germany's upcoming snap elections in February, for example, migration has emerged as a top issue, with some politicians taking a hard stance on refugees to win votes. I mean, it works. Yeah. We've seen that in the United States as well with immigrants. Germany is not an outlier. Anti-immigrant sentiment and rhetoric has been on the rise in Italy, Belgium, Netherlands. We could go on. How will this shape future policy on Syrian refugees, as well as other migrants across Europe?
It's a real concern. It's a real concern that everything you just said. The right wing in Germany is ascendant. There was a vote of no confidence in the current government. They are going to be having snap elections in an election season, as we've seen here in the United States, where scapegoating of immigrants and refugees, vilifying them, distorting, one crime is committed and suddenly everybody is stigmatized in that population.
We saw it in 2015 as well, when a bunch of Syrians came into Europe.
Yeah, exactly that sort of thing. So you've got all that sort of stigma, all that scapegoating, which politicians are going to weaponize for votes and to scare people into voting. I mean, fear-mongering is unfortunately something that goes with the territory. Yeah. So it's a real concern. It's a real concern. But hopefully there is an understanding of two things. One is rule of law, and that there are procedures that are there for a reason. There are reasons to take things in a systematic and an objective and deliberative manner. When people's lives are at stake and you're determining, is this person going to be killed if you return them or not, you want to be damn sure that you're doing the right thing before you make that choice. And the other point is, really more of a common humanity, morality question. You know, the one is legal and one is moral. And hopefully voters can put themselves in the shoes of people who are not as fortunate as they are. And hopefully they can look at the devastation in Syria. They can look at the conditions that no one would want their children to return to.
Yeah.
And the uncertainty politically as well. You know,
talk to me about that returning thing. I mean, according to the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, 90% of Syria's population is relying on humanitarian aid for those people who do make the decisions you pointed out they have a right to make to return home. How do they navigate that? You know, how do they cope?
I mean, at the moment it's chaos. And at the moment, we don't know, you know, where people are going to be living, what their shelter is, what they can do in terms of basics, the food and water. We're not even talking about education. We're not talking about, you know, governance and all these other questions that are further down the line.
Well, they're coming. I mean, the numbers show, what the reports are showing is that as many as 1 million people will be returning in early 2025.
And I think I mean, none of us knows for sure.
Yeah.
And the situation can change overnight, basically, particularly the political situation there, if people get fearful about that. But Syrians, I think what this tells us, we are seeing, and I've been on the phone with our own researchers that have been crossing the border between Lebanon and Syria, and they're seeing traffic actually in both directions, as it turns out, and I think that's significant. There's some outflow as well. But people are spontaneously returning, and that tells us a number of things, that many Syrians are really going to want to return. And they're going to want to contribute to their own reconstruction of their own country, to rebuild this country, in many cases, you know, clearing that rubble themselves and building their homes back with their own two hands. But they need the resources to be able to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's the issue of resources, there's the issue of displacement, as you're talking about. There's the very real danger of, I mean, you're talking about like actual mines, like all that stuff is considerable. There's also the question of political persecution. Yeah. That's something that people are facing and have faced in Syria for a long time. If all these people are returning home and they're facing, and they've always faced political persecution, at least in recent history, what happens now when the major players sort of shift? The main players in Syria right now that control large swaths of territory, we can talk about Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the National Syrian Army, the Syrian Democratic Forces. They've all been accused of human rights abuses. They've all been, you're right, to be sure, to be sure. Despite the recent reassurances from those newly in charge that they're going to respect the rights of minorities, could we see more people fleeing Syria in fear of persecution?
I mean, we are hopeful. Some of the rhetoric that we've heard from the transitional authorities is positive and hopeful as well. But we do need to be on the lookout for repression, for retaliation, for you know, the rights of minorities, the right of, you know, political opposition. And that's taking into account that there should be accountability for people that tortured, you know, for people that committed crimes under the previous regime. You know, we're not saying to do otherwise, but you do it in a deliberative and orderly manner. And you know, we're talking about a country that really doesn't have a constitution to speak of, or needs a whole new governance structure.
For sure.
It's been decades of the Assad family regime. I think it goes back about 50 years.
Yeah, between Hafez and Bashar. How confident are you that minority groups won't be persecuted? I'm thinking specifically about ethnic and religious minorities.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, I was just on the phone with Human Rights Watch people that were on the Lebanon-Syria border, and they were, you know, talking to people that were crossing from Syria into Lebanon, and it could tell from their accents that they were coming from the Latakia, the coastal area, you know, probably Alawite minority people, and that are afraid, you know, frankly. And so that's going to be, something that everyone's going to be watching very, very closely. But I think there also has to be the openness of neighbors that are feeling exhausted themselves. I mean, we talk about compassion fatigue. A country like Lebanon, a quarter of its population has been a refugee population, and they've just had, with the Israeli incursions in the south. So this is a country that's reeling on many different fronts, and yet we're saying to Lebanon, you need to be patient, you need to be open, you need to continue to be open to new influxes of refugees, even as other people are leaving. And there will be people that have been there for a long time, that have been in opposition to Assad, that are still going to need to take a wait-and-see approach. And I say this to the Europeans: if you're complaining, look at what look at what Lebanon's dealing with. The capacity of Europeans to integrate people, to process claims, and to actually take advantage of the benefits that refugees can provide in nursing, for example, and shortages, in labor shortages in Germany, where Syrians are actually well-educated, many people with professional backgrounds that came in 2015, 2016, 2017, that have really contributed to Germany, particularly in the service areas and in healthcare. And we shouldn't discount that refugees are not entirely a burden.
Bill Frelick, thank you so much for joining me on UpFront.
My pleasure.